Yes. My name is Tianyi Zhang, first year PhD student in the Faculty of Divinity, Cambridge. And firstly, I would like to thank sincerely everyone for listening to my talk today, and particularly Professor John Marvel for giving me this chance to share some of my recent thoughts about Suhrawardi and the nature of illuminationist philosophy, and Dr. Tony Street for supervising my work. They both have given me many valuable suggestions and have enlightened me in every possible way. So today I will be talking about my research on Suhrawardi, which I had already somehow initiated when I was doing a master's degree in Arabic philosophy in the Department of Philosophy, Peking University. Although my MA thesis is eventually on Avicenna's theory of universals, rather than something to do with Suhrawardi. And then I decided to continue with my research on Suhrawardi here in Cambridge, since I am always fascinated by Suhrawardi's works, and particularly his masterpiece, Peripatetic, or the philosophy of illumination, his elaboration of oriental wisdom, and his originality and creativity. And I believe firmly that Suhrawardi is one of the most significant philosophers after Avicenna in the whole Islamic intellectual history, although he did not have the honor of being translated into Latin in the Middle Ages. And I will talk mainly about three things regarding Suhrawardi and the nature of illuminationist philosophy, which has much to do with thinking and immaterial things as universals, which is the theme of the conference. And firstly, I will say something about Suhrawardi's philosophical works, focusing on the relation between the four peripatetic works and the Hikmat-ul-Islam, or the philosophy of illumination. Then I will give a new interpretation of the nature of illuminationist philosophy, as implied by this close relation between the peripatetic works and Hikmat-ul-Islam, or the philosophy of illumination. And lastly, I will use this new account of illuminationism to connect some of Suhrawardi's seemingly scattered theories together, to show how this new interpretation of nature of illuminationism can work, taking his theory of Platonic forms and the direct knowledge of self-knowers, for example, which are somehow related to the theme of the conference. As an introduction to Suhrawardi himself, I shall not say much, but only mention two names people usually use to refer to him. Shihab-Din Suhrawardi was born around 1154 or 1155 in the village of Suhraward, the northwest of Iran, and he is firstly known as Al-Maqtul, he who was killed. This is because Suhrawardi was executed at a very young age, probably at the age of 38 or 36, by Malik Dahir al-Ayyubi, at the command of his father, the famous Salahuddin. As for the reason of his death, people have various opinions about it. And more often, Suhrawardi is known by another name, Zhang, the master of illumination. And this is probably because of the name of his masterpiece, Hikmat-ul-Islam, which means the philosophy of illumination. The many propositions or principles Suhrawardi labeled as illuminationist, or Ishraqi, and more importantly, the philosophy he founded, which is known as illuminationist philosophy, the Hikmat-ul-Ishraqi, or illuminationism, and Ishraqi. And at this point, we may wonder, what does Suhrawardi mean by this illuminationist philosophy? What is the nature of it, and how is it essentially different from the peripatetic philosophy, which was the mainstream philosophy at Suhrawardi's time? And it will be our main task to answer these questions regarding the nature of illuminationist philosophy in what follows. And this matters a great deal, for with the one and only accurate interpretation of the nature of illuminationist philosophy, we can solve many significant problems puzzling modern scholars. For example, first, should illuminationist philosophy be considered as pure theosophy or as serious philosophy? And second, should Suhrawardi himself be treated as a pure mystic or Sufi or a true philosopher? And 3, how can we make the seemingly scattered principles or theories labeled as illuminationists as a consistent and systematic whole, rather than leaving them as somewhat unrelated and freestanding propositions? And for example, how to connect his rejection of the peripatetic essential definition with his denial of the external existence of any common intention as ma'an and am, with the theory of Platonic forms, and with his argument for a higher kind of direct knowledge of self-perceivers or self-knowers, which is called fog, or spiritual tasting, or cash, or unveiling. I shall start by examining Suhrawardi's philosophical works, which are divided into 2 parts or kinds: the 4 peripatetic works and Zhang, or the philosophy of illumination. According to Suhrawardi, based on the method of the peripatetics, he has written 4 peripatetic works, which contain the vast bulk of his philosophical writing. And based on another path, he has composed the only illuminationist masterpiece, Zhang, the philosophy of illumination. And at this point, several questions may arise in our mind. First, what are the contents of these peripatetic works? How do they relate to Zhang, or the philosophy of illumination? And 3, since the illuminationist philosophy is fundamentally different from peripatetic philosophy, according to Suhrawardi, then why does he compose so many works according to the method or the approach of the peripatetics? Shouldn't he write more illuminationist works rather than the peripatetic works? Are the 4 peripatetic works forming an indispensable part of Suhrawardi's whole illuminationist project? Or are they merely works that represent Suhrawardi's immature ideas when he was still supportive of peripatetic philosophy? In other words, how should we evaluate the importance of these 4 peripatetic works, especially given the fact that modern readers of Suhrawardi usually tend to ignore these peripatetic works altogether and read Zhang, or the philosophy of illumination, either as a freestanding work or together with his mystical allegories. I shall start by introducing the contents of these 4 works one by one, according to Suhrawardi's own introduction to these books. I will refer to them by their Arabic names and my suggested translation, which is somewhat different from others' translation. And these names can be found on the first page of the handout. And then I will answer the questions mentioned above regarding the relation between the 4 peripatetic works and Zhang, or the philosophy of illumination, by analyzing one passage quoted and translated from Suhrawardi's own introduction to Al-Mutarahat, or the debates. The first work, peripatetic work, is called Tarwihat al-Lawhi wal-Arshid, or the marginal notes of the tablet and the throne, usually referred to as the Tarwihat, or the marginal notes for short. It is a summary or an epitome of the principles of peripatetic philosophy in a very small volume. And this work is commentated on thoroughly by 13th century Jewish philosopher Ibn Kamuna. And second, al-Lamahat, or the glances, is like an epitome of the epitome of the heart, or the marginal notes. So it is even more concise than a Tarihat. Suhrawardi says in his introduction to al-Lamahat on glances that it is extremely concise and clearly rejects. And 3, al-Muqawamat, or the oppositions, serves somewhat as appendices of a Tarihat, or the marginal notes, which contains the necessary correction from the peripatetic's point of view of what the ancients have neglected in the so-called important matters at Al-Dina. And 4, al-Mashari' wal-Mutarahat, or the sources and the debates, usually referred to as the Mutarahat, or the debates for short, serve somewhat as a bridge from a Tarihat, or the marginal notes, to Zhang, or the philosophy of illumination. I have translated part of Suhrawardi's introduction to Al-Mutarahat, or the debates, which is on the first page of the handout. By analyzing this introduction, we can solve several puzzles: the contents of Al-Mutarahat, or the debates, the significance of the four peripatetic works, their relation to the Hikmat al-Zhang, or the philosophy of illumination, and the only right way to read Hikmat al-Zhang, or the philosophy of illumination. Suhrawardi says in his introduction to Al-Mutarahat of debates, "This is a book which includes the three sciences. I wrote it in accordance with your suggestions to me, my brothers. I mentioned in it studies and rules, which do not exist in other books. They are very useful and are taken out and extracted from my arrangements," which is to say, the Mutarahat of the debates firstly contains many useful studies and rules related to peripatetic philosophy, and which cannot be found in his other books. So, the Mutarahat of the debates seems to be a necessary complement to his other peripatetic works. And moreover, Suhrawardi says, "Despite this, I do not deviate much from the approach of the peripatetics, though I have set down points and subtle things which hint at noble principles added to what they, that is, the peripatetics mentioned." So, Al-Mutarahat of the debates as well includes points and subtle things which Suhrawardi deliberately sets down in this book, and which ultimately hint at noble principles, Qur'an Sharifa, which undoubtedly refer to those illuminationist principles in Hikmat al-Zhang, of the philosophy of illumination. And therefore, the Mutarahat of the debates not only serves as a complement to his other peripatetic works, but also a bridge from peripatetic philosophy to illuminationist philosophy. And the most solid piece of evidence to prove that the peripatetic works and the Hikmat al-Zhang, or the philosophy of illumination, are closely related, forming Suhrawardi's one and the same illuminationist project, and therefore should be read together, is what Suhrawardi says next. "Whoever loses his passion halfway after contemplating the books of the general people, that is, the peripatetic works, satisfied with what others are not satisfied with, and whoever is not skillful at the sciences of investigation, that is, peripatetic philosophy, there is no way for him to reach my book, named Hikmat al-Zhang." This book, Al-Mutarahat of the debates, ought to be read before it, that is, Hikmat al-Zhang, and after the examination of the epitome named At-Tawihad, or the marginal way. Obviously, Suhrawardi has made it perfectly clear here that Hikmat al-Zhang, or the philosophy of illumination, should be read after Tawihad, or the marginal notes, and Al-Mutarahat of the debates, and this is the key to many puzzles. First of all, it alone is enough to prove that the peripatetic works, or at least the Tawihad and Mutarahat, form an indispensable part of Suhrawardi's whole illuminationist project. And second, it opens up a new way for us to read Hikmat al-Zhang, or the philosophy of illumination, and that is to read it together with the peripatetic works, rather than treating it as a freestanding work, or reading it together with the mystical allegories. And three, most importantly, it implies the close relationship between illuminationist philosophy and peripatetic philosophy. Not only the close relation between Hikmat al-Zhang and the peripatetic works. What Suhrawardi is really saying seems to be that a full understanding of illuminationist philosophy has to be based on one's in-depth knowledge of peripatetic philosophy. But why is it the case? Why would Suhrawardi require his readers to read Hikmat al-Zhang, or the philosophy of illumination, only after studying At-Tawihad, or the marginal notes, and Al-Mutarahat of the debates? And second, why do we need an in-depth knowledge of peripatetic philosophy in order to understand illuminationist philosophy? To answer these questions, we have to touch on the nature of illuminationist philosophy, which must be quite different from almost all the popular interpretations of the nature of illuminationist philosophy. For example, according to Suhrawardi and Zhang, the two famous medieval commentators of Peripatetic of the philosophy of illumination, illuminationist philosophy is equal to the philosophy of unveiling, Peripatetic, and the philosophy of orientals, Peripatetic. And according to some modern scholars, illuminationist philosophy is a certain kind of theosophy which is related to pre-Aristotelian period, before philosophy became rationalized and when intellectual intuition was still the most excellent way for attaining knowledge. And some hold that illuminationism is such mystical experience as leads to philosophical insight, or mystical experience that is based on philosophical insight. And as we can see, none of these interpretations of the nature of illuminationist philosophy has anything to do with peripatetic philosophy. If this were the case, then why would Suhrawardi require readers of Peripatetic or the philosophy of illumination to read his peripatetic works first? So there must be another explanation of the nature of illuminationist philosophy, which should have much to do with the nature of peripatetic philosophy. And when editing the third part on metaphysics of Al-Mutarahat, of the debates, Henry Corbin not only has included the introduction of the whole book, that is Al-Mutarahat of the debates, in front of his edition, but also deliberately brought in, as a footnote at the end of this introduction, a significant discussion of Suhrawardi, quoted from the first part of logic of Al-Mutarahat of the debates. Corbin says, we mention here a discussion of the author, Suhrawardi, in the logic of Al-Mutarahat, in which there is a useful explanation of the meaning of illumination and the illuminationist philosophy. We will see by analyzing the text, which is translated on page 2 of the handout, that Suhrawardi's own explanation of illuminationist philosophy is completely different from the various interpretations mentioned above, but it goes much deeper. The whole discussion is quite long, but I think it is very much worth going through sentence by sentence, and I shall explain what Suhrawardi means as we read. Know that whoever acknowledges that first, surface is not magnitude and another thing, which are both stable in the external world. Rather, its being magnitude is the same as its being surface in the external world, which is to say, the metaphysical structure of surface in the external world is not equal to the aggregate of being magnitude and a certain differential. Rather, external surface is indivisible. So Suhrawardi says, its being magnitude is the same as its being surface. And color is not something stable in the external world, and it has a differentia which is independent in existence, and their aggregate is blackness. Rather, it is one thing, which is to say, the metaphysical structure of external blackness also does not equal to the aggregate of being color and the differentia of blackness. Rather, external blackness is numerically one, which cannot be divided. And Suhrawardi continues, second, if blackness has no part in the external world, then it has no part in the mind, because mental form should correspond to the external. So Suhrawardi is pursuing the total correspondence of mental form with things in the external world, which are both numerically one, indivisible, individual, and particular. And 3, if the external does not subsist in its reality by another thing, then the mental does not subsist by it by way of priority. And that which makes a thing subsist is inseparable from it, either in the mind or in the external world, which is to say, the metaphysical structure of external things should not be determined by the metaphysical structure of its mental form obtained by abstraction, which is the aggregate of different common intentions like genus and differential. And whoever acknowledges all the three premises above, then he has to acknowledge, according to Suhrawardi, that this kind of thing, according to what necessarily follows, this acknowledgement does not have any definition, but only description if it is known. And this is because essential definition is made of two essentials, which are genus and differential. But these essentials do not exist themselves in the external world. So external things, which are numerically one, indivisible, and particular, only have description rather than definition. And then Suhrawardi begins to analyze the second example of blackness in detail. If the being color of blackness means it's being visible, being sensible by visual sensation, then that is something which follows its quiddity. That is the quiddity of blackness. For a thing firstly becomes realized or actualized, then it can be sensed. And that which is taken as the differentia of blackness, which is its being compressing the vision, is an accidental thing. For its compressing vision, or the disposition of compressing of the thing, follows its reality, which becomes stable in the external world in the first place. So Suhrawardi is arguing that, according to the account of the Peripatetics, genus and differentia of the external blackness both depend on the visual sensation of human. So obviously they cannot exist in the external world. Rather, they are nothing but mental conceptions in human mind. And for this reason, that is, for the reason that external things cannot be divided into genus and differentia, Sheikh Abu Ali ibn Sina, or Avicenna, clarifies in his booklets, which he attributes to the Orientals, and which are found scattered, not united, that simple things can be described but not defined. And this refers to Avicenna's logic of Oriental. So Suhrawardi is using Avicenna's argument for simple things cannot be defined against him. At last, Suhrawardi is attacking Avicenna's Oriental philosophy for not establishing the Oriental foundation. And that's really much agree. And he says, although Avicenna, attributes these booklets to the Orient, they by themselves are from the principles of the Peripatetic and the common philosophy, except that he perhaps changes the expression or arranges in some branches some difference that he has counted in a way that it does not differ from his other books. But the Oriental foundation, established in the time of Husserl, scientists, is not established by it as this kind of arrangement. It is a Greek matter, and it is the special philosophy. So as we can see, Suhrawardi's own explanation of Illuminationist philosophy is based on the Oriental foundation, which has much to do with Peripatetic philosophy, or the common philosophy. Then what does he mean by this Oriental foundation? I would like to explain again what Suhrawardi has argued above. And let's take blackness, for example. When external blackness arises in the mind, it is understood and abstracted into being color and the differentia of blackness. Then we say that the metaphysical structure of the mental blackness is the aggregate of being color and the differentia of blackness. Then, according to the Peripatetics, the real metaphysical structure of external blackness should be as well the aggregate of being color and differentia of blackness, which should both be somehow stable in the external world. However, if we consider what the Peripatetics mean by being color and the differentia of blackness seriously, we will find that it is impossible for them to exist in the external world. For what the Peripatetics mean by being color is its being sensible by visual sensation, and by differentia of blackness they mean its being compressed in the vision, both of which are dependent on the visual sensation of human being. However, external blackness obviously is not realized or actualized in the external world dependent on visual sensation of human being. Rather, blackness actualizes in the external world in the first place, then it can be sensed by human being. And then it is abstracted into being color and the differential of blackness, which are two common intentions existing merely in the human mind. And they together form the metaphysical structure of the mental blackness. And this is why Suhrawardi says that being color is merely something which follows the quiddity of blackness, and differentia of blackness is nothing but an accidental thing of the external blackness. And since there are two common intentions abstracted from the numerically one external blackness, and therefore it is impossible for the external blackness to be equal to the aggregate of being color and differentia of blackness. For the external blackness is numerically one thing, which cannot be divided by any means in the external world. In other words, according to Suhrawardi, the Peripatetics have reserved the relation between the external and the mental, holding that it is the metaphysical structure of the mental obtained by abstraction that determines the structure of the external, and then judging that particular things in the external world exist based on common intentions. And therefore, what Suhrawardi means by the oriental foundation and what he aims to achieve with his illuminationist philosophy is the total correspondence of our knowledge with external things. He refuses to use any kind of universal or common intention as intermediate, but aims to know external things as they are, and to know particular things in particular way, rather than any universal way. And at last, I would like to use this new account of Illuminationism to connect some of Suhrawardi's seemingly scattered theories together to show how this new interpretation of the nature of Illuminationism can work. And let's take three examples. His denial of essential definition and the external existence of any common intention, and his theory of Platonic forms and direct knowledge of self-knowers. Firstly, it should now be obvious to see why Suhrawardi came to reject the Peripatetic essential definition. And this is because the essential definition is made of essentials as genus and differential. But nothing in the external world is made of genus and differential. So Suhrawardi would argue that things do not have definition but only descriptions. And for the same reason, no common intention, including genus, differential, and any other kind of universals, could exist in the external world. And in the third part on logic of Peripatetic, or the philosophy of illumination, Suhrawardi has put forward many arguments and spent many pages to prove this point. And secondly, why would Suhrawardi argue for the existence of Platonic forms? This is because now that everything is particular in the external world, and it is undeniable that certain individuals belong to certain groups, and this is the very reason why we give certain things certain names. So we need something which is not common nature in Avicenna's theory of universals to explain the essential similarity between individuals. And therefore, Suhrawardi has to resort to Platonic forms, which are as well particular to explain this kind of similarity, without resorting to any kind of universals. And it is worth mentioning that Platonic forms in Illuminationist philosophy are not merely ideas, they are immaterialized, or neuroinjurial in themselves, which means they are all particular self-knowers or self-perceivers, just like our souls. And the difference lies in that they are immaterialized as laws of species or masters of species, and they are not associated with darkness due to their perfection. But we are immaterialized, controlling human bodies due to our imperfection. So it is interesting to see in Suhrawardi's case how a philosopher can be a Platonist, arguing for the existence of Platonic forms without being a Platonic realist. And lastly, why would Suhrawardi argue for direct knowledge, including sensations, and the higher kind of direct knowledge, called both spiritual tasting or catch or unveiling? Now that abstraction is no longer the accurate way to know things to Suhrawardi, he would need to resort to direct knowledge, to know things directly rather than using universals as intermediate. And to know material things, we need to know them directly, as they are, with our sensations. And to know immaterial things, like ourselves, Platonic forms, and other higher immaterialized or separate intellects, we need to use this higher kind of direct knowledge, which is called Zhang, or spiritual tasting, catch, or unveiling. And in order to achieve Zhang, or spiritual tasting, we need to get rid of our bodies, to clear away hindrance between us and those lines. And this is why Suhrawardi would resort to mystical practice in the end of Illumination, or the philosophy of illumination. But this does not mean that we should not take Illuminationist philosophy as serious philosophy. And this also does not mean that we should not take Suhrawardi himself as one of the most significant and creative philosophers in the Islamic intellectual history. And because Suhrawardi resort to mysticism at last for a very deeply considered philosophical reason, and that is to know things directly as they are, rather than knowing them through any kind of universals as intermediate. And that, I think, should be taken as the nature of illuminationist philosophy. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. We've got time for questions.
So, I mean, it's difficult to translate some of this conceptually.